On the 3rd of July of 1930, a maid discovered the dead body of her employer on the floor of the sitting room in an upmarket apartment in Temple, London. The victim was 37-year-old Sidney Russell Cook, mysteriously shot through the stomach by a hunting rifle. He was the husband of Titanic Captain Edward Smith's only daughter, Helen, known to friends as Mel. Unknown to many, he was also an MI5 spy, described as like a prototype of James Bond, and also the esteemed Cambridge economic John Maynard Keynes' lover. Plot twist. Are you intrigued? So am I, and so are many. The book sold out, but we're here to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Titanic Legacy, a podcast that explores Titanic's long lasting impact through conversations with creators, authors, artists, historians, filmmakers, family members, musicians, entrepreneurs who continue to keep the Ship of Dreams legacy not just alive, but thriving and moving forward through their lives, through conversations, through their creative work. I'm your host, Paul Carganilla, and today I am excited to bring you a conversation with author Dan Parks here on Titanic Legacy. We're going to dive into his book, Titanic Legacy, The Captain, the Daughter, and the Spy, it's published by Amberley Publishing. It contains never before published private letters and family photographs telling the true untold story of a legendary captain, the mysterious death of a British spy, and the inspirational daughter who stepped out of the shadow of misfortune to carve her own path. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, we have the pleasure of speaking with the author today, and he professionally runs a United Kingdom-based film production company, which is awesome. But in his spare time, he has been researching, writing, and making films about the Titanic for more than 35 years. He presently runs 3 research websites on the Titanic, and his William Murdoch YouTube channel has just like a casual 1.5 million views. He's an active member of the Titanic community in both person and on social media. Can't wait to hear all about everything he's got going on. His book, Get to Know Him. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podcast, Dan Parks.
Hello, Paul. Well, that was a fantastic introduction. Can I record that and put it into like a Hollywood style trailer or something? That was just
Absolutely.
perfect.
You want me to come in with something like, in a world where Titanic rules supreme, Dan Parks is bringing the secret stories of spies to life. Could do
Yeah,
something like
yeah, brilliant. I mean, that was spot on.
that. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to chat with you today. Thank you for making the time. As I like to ask all of our guests whenever we launch into a conversation, where in the world are you joining us from?
From Brighton, UK, so it's like just past 9 o'clock here, and it's been a beautiful sunny day in England. We do get sort of sunny weather here occasionally, and
Wow.
today was one of them, once a year perhaps.
I think we traded. I'm in beautiful Southern California, and it's been dreary and rainy today. Interesting.
Yeah,
Here
that sounds very British.
it does. We did a weather swap here today, but oh my goodness! So you put out this book, Titanic Legacy, and I saw it on Facebook, and I was like, well, I got to have the author on my podcast, Titanic Legacy, and
Yeah, when I saw your podcast, I was like, who's stealing whose idea here, you know?
well, so I started my podcast, and then I found there's a group. One of the authors that I interviewed early on, Brad Payne, he runs a Facebook group called Titanic Legacy Society on Facebook, and I was like, you know, I'm not trying to steal from anybody. It's just I want to focus and examine the legacy left behind by not just, I mean, obviously the ship's legacy, but it's being carried forth by survivors and creators and authors. And it's fascinating to me how I talk with so many guests about how it's still blooming. It feels like it's still growing 113 years later, this interest in Titanic. What first, how did she first come to you? What grabbed your interest first?
Oh, for me personally, it was 1988, and I was living in Australia at the time because I'm originally from New Zealand, hence the accent. And my parents kind of forced me to watch SOS Titanic. It's a 1979 film. I wasn't really keen on the idea, but they kind of sold it to me. The ship's going to sink, and I was, a child. That kind of sort of sounded interesting to me. But I don't know if you've seen the SOS Titanic, but
Oh,
it's
yes.
kind of it's not the most, compared to say James Cameron's film, it's not the most dramatic of films. And I'll be honest, it didn't grip me at all. But it kind of sowed a little seed in my mind about the ship. And then a little while after, I was in a bookshop and I saw this book, and it was Build the Titanic. And it's a book where you can actually build the ship. It's like a 1.5 meter cardboard model of the ship. And do you have that? Yes, it looks like you're
I have
looking
something
for it.
that's I don't think it's exactly the same thing, but it's it's like a book,
Yeah, I mean that's not it, but
but you
it's
can
I
build
think it's a
the
German company that published it. But
huh.
um and and as I liked model building, so that's what kind of entranced me. But the book was clever because not only were you building the ship, but in between it had pages of history. So you were learning about the engineering, about the people, about what happened. So as I was building it, I was learning about what happened on those decks, and that really gripped me. By the time I finished the model, I understood what actually happened on the ship. And long story short, I presented it at my school, and I became known as Mr. Titanic. People thought I knew everything about it, but I was only starting then. And before you, and I was like touring Rotary clubs and what have you, and that's where it began. I mean, it's kind of unusual because most people of the 80s, it was 1985, September 1st, when the wreck was discovered.
Mhm.
Most people's interest was peaked.
Including
But
mine.
um,
Yep.
but for me, it was Halley's Comet. In 1985, I was more interested in astronomy, and it was Halley's Comet at that point. And I don't even remember the wreck discovery news. I don't know if it even registered on my radar at any point. So it was that model that I built, and since then I've collected loads of books and memorabilia. But I've kind of tended towards the deck officers, the captain and the deck officers, and hence the websites that have developed. And I never ever thought I'd write a book. That was never the plan. I'm very happy as a consumer of Titanic books. The brilliant material from like people like Don Lynch and the on Sea of Glass authors, which I think is the Titanic Bible for me personally. I've always held them in a huge high esteem. Never thought that I would become an author, and yet just yesterday my wife and I were having a coffee in town. We just dropped into a local Waterstones, which is probably the top bookseller in England.
Our version
Um,
of Barnes and Noble over here.
yeah, I think that would be right.
Mhm.
And my wife said, "Why don't we just see if your book's there?" And I was like, "No, no, it won't be there." And you're looking at all these other authors that I know really well doing work on Churchill and royalty, and then slotted in between was my book. And it was like a surreal but yet imposter syndrome moment where you're thinking, yeah, actually I have written a book, you know. But going back to Titanic Legacy, the title, that was the hardest part. Writing the book wrote itself because the information about the spy, the captain, and what happened to the daughter, it just takes the legwork to go and hunt that information down and put it together and to fully reference it. Like I'm very keen that everything that in my book is fully referenced. There's about 1,000 endnotes in it. But the hardest thing was coming up with a title. The original title of the book was The Titanic Captain's Daughter. That was, and it just felt a bit awkward, but also, as you possibly can see behind me, it's three characters in the book. It's not just the daughter. She's kind of the conduit of the story, but the story is also about her father, and it's also about what happened to her husband. So I struggled to think, well, how do you encapsulate that in a single title that also signals that it's about the Titanic? And that's where the word legacy comes in because it's not just what happened during the disaster, but the effect that it had on the family. So it's a big story, and coming out with that title, I'll be honest, was the hardest thing ever. But there's another author, Gary Cooper, who wrote the forward kindly. He said to me, "Why don't you make a title that has three elements to it?" And that kind of switched on something in my head, and I thought, yes, that's exactly right. It's three characters: the captain, the daughter, and the spy, and that's hence the tagline.
And I haven't, unfortunately, been able to get to actually dig in and read it, but I've obviously sat down with it and flipped through it, and it is sectioned out into three different sections as well.
Yeah, part one, two, and three, which the captain, the spy, and the daughter. So it is quite clearly sort of signposted as to where you are. And also, as a filmmaker, I couldn't help but put as many visual elements in there as possible. I mean, I'm very happy to read a book with no pictures, but I do know that the visuals really help. And I was able to uncover some amazing photographs, for example, of Captain Smith and his wife. I mean, for many years. In fact, I've got it here. I mean, this is the most popular image that for over a century is the captain's widow Eleanor and the daughter, and this was on the front page of the Daily Mirror just after the disaster. So this for years was like the picture that everyone saw, but the reality is that she was actually 14 years old at the time that she lost her father, the Titanic disaster. So it's an old photograph. So I was quite keen during the research stage to try to find, the photographs that told the family story of what really happened. Even just finding the like a marriage photograph. I really wanted to find photographs that showed them as a family, him out of uniform, the captain out of uniform, and hence there's 130 images. Actually, originally, when I first submitted the manuscript, there was 274 images, and the publisher said, "Can you bring that down to 100?" And I sort of just very discreetly snuck in 130, just pretended I couldn't count. And fortunately, neither can they, the publishers. Maybe they're
Better to
better with
ask
words
forgiveness,
than
right?
yeah. So 100, there was 130 instead of 100, which I'm happy about.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite a visual story, and there's some photographs in there that have never been seen before.
I was
Of,
gonna ask you when I was flipping
yeah.
through, I was like, we have the internet and everything, but where did you get these photos I've never seen before? How do you go about getting those?
I mean, it's a combination of the amazing libraries, museums, and collections that are out there, and just doing a little bit of digging and also contacts. I mean, there's a lot of private collections out there that aren't publicly available, but if you get to speak to people, I mean, for example, I included the letters that Captain Smith wrote to a family member in the United States, which give a real insight into what he was thinking, because we know the man as reported in the newspapers and as the press releases and the media showed him. But what about behind the scenes, behind the uniform? And there's some fantastic letters that he wrote. But I wanted to get permission to include them, and it was the Mystic Sea Museum in the US, and I sent like loads of emails and letters, and I couldn't get in contact with them. And then one day I thought, well, I'll just invent an email. I found out the director of the collection's name, and I put his name as if what I assume would be the email address for him. And I just sent it to him and said, "You've got these fantastic letters I'd like access to." He replied within 24 hours and said, "What do you want? High resolution images. You can publish it. We just want a copy of the book." And it's like it just blows open a whole new archive of information. And included in that archive was a letter that Eleanor, Captain Smith's widow, wrote a month or so after the disaster, which expressing her feelings. She writes on mourning stationery, where the stationery has black band around it, and it's stuff like that, which is just fantastic. But you've just got to keep hunting and trying. I mean, the museums are out there, the libraries are out there, and now things are being digitized. It's even easier. You can do a lot of it online. But for me, I wanted to do the legwork, so I literally I went to Liverpool, went to the British Museum, went to any of the libraries, Southampton, obviously, because there's something about the tactile, the tangible. I mean, the Southampton Museum, for example, included quite a few images from them. A lot of it hasn't been digitized yet. A lot
Mm.
of it's still on microfilm. So I had to relearn the art of lacing up microfilm machines like little projectors, and searching through thousands of pages.
How fun is that though? You kind of become like a spy or an investigator yourself, like actually doing the search, and then how thrilling is it when you find something?
Oh yeah, I mean it's goose pimple material, isn't it? I mean, when I found there's a photograph I found of Mel, Captain Smith's daughter. As you said, her name's Helen, but she was known as Mel. I'd heard about her being a pilot, and I thought that sounds really good. It's like 1930s. There were obviously a lot of pilots. I mean, Amelia Earhart is probably the most famous or infamous example, but I'd heard about pilots during the 30s, and I thought my dream would be to find a photo of her with her plane. And I was searching through some different archives, and I suddenly chanced upon, just by complete chance, there she is, standing next to, I mean, she's literally just hopped off her Gypsy Moth biplane. She
Huh.
probably doesn't have any makeup on. She's got her bags, and it's kind of one of these photographs you can almost tell how awkward. And it's interesting because Captain Smith often looks awkward in a lot of the film and photographs of him. You can tell he's not happy about being filmed.
Yeah.
He's probably like me. I mean, I'm more comfortable behind the camera than I am in front of it. But you see this photograph of her hopping off her plane and just standing there, and to me that was a goose pimple moment,
Yeah.
where suddenly all that research is solidified in a visual image that shows exactly what it's all about.
That's
Because you can
amazing.
easily say that she was a pilot, but then now you actually see
Yeah.
that she's a pilot, and it's interesting because there's at the end of James Cameron's film, when Rose is sleeping or has died, I don't know if
Hmm.
there's still a debate over that or not, but the camera kind of pans along all these photographs of her and what she achieves post Titanic, and one of them is of Rose standing with a plane. Now, a few have said to me after seeing the photograph in my book, do you think James Cameron was inspired by that photograph? And I'm like, I mean, it's possible, but I don't think anyone knew about this photograph. And it's interesting that there's a sort of similarity in story.
For anyone listening to the audio version of this, I invite you to, if you didn't know, we actually record most of these episodes in a live stream on YouTube. You can find us on the Titanic Legacy YouTube channel or the Titanic Book Club YouTube channel. And we invite anyone who happens to be around when we're recording these episodes to drop into the chat and ask any questions. And I'm happy that we have some actually right now as we're recording. Titan 93 has a question, but first she's come or he or she is commenting on the coincidence that Thomas Andrews' daughter also became a pilot as well. So that's interesting. If James Cameron was inspired by either Thomas Andrews' daughter or Captain Smith's daughter becoming, and that's, I feel like that would be super rare for back then for a female to become a pilot. But the fact that they both have that connection, that's super interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That is interesting, but I wouldn't say it's super rare because during the 30s,
Oh.
there was this kind of it became quite popular. I mean, during the 20s, Mel was very much involved in art,
Hmm.
and then after her husband died in 1930, as you mentioned in your introduction, she then became quite adventurous, and I sort of spread her wings, to excuse the pun, and hence became a pilot. And there's a lot of pilots at that time who were women. In fact, I don't know if that this is correct, but my sense is that there's almost more women pilots in the 1930s than there are now, because there are very few women pilots now. I fly quite a lot because of my work, and it's very rare to see or hear a captain who's the pilot who's a woman. But during the 30s, there seems to be this kind of I don't know, enthusiasm for it. And Mel went and studied at an airport near Heathrow. She was involved in a plane crash just a month or so before she actually got her pilot's license. And I discovered that the pilot that she was with during this plane crash was also, I'm reasonably sure, a boyfriend. Well, she was tied into a clause where she couldn't remarry, otherwise she would lose quite a large inheritance, which again wasn't highly unusual for the times. In fact, Captain Smith had a very similar clause in his will
Yeah.
for his when his widow inherited his inheritance. But Mal had the same clause, so she never remarried to retain the inheritance. But I've actually been able to trace quite a few boyfriends along the
Hmm.
way. One of whom was this lieutenant. He was actually a stunt pilot. He used to fly biplanes upside down, and she had a crash in one of these just before getting her pilot's license. But if you want to know more, read the book.
Interesting how,
Shameless plug.
crashes in this family's lineage. Uh,
Yes.
Speaking of shameless plugs for your book, we were just discussing your book came out last month, like a month and 10 days ago, and it's sold out. It's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as surprised as you are. I mean, it was released 8th of April in the US. It was released in the UK in February. By the end of April, the publisher came back to me and said, the publisher used the expression "all out." So in other words, out of stock, and that is not only the US, it's globally now, which is another reason why I was quite surprised to see a copy sitting in our local Waterstones,
Yeah.
because the Waterstones website says it's out of stock, and so yeah, I'm as surprised as anyone, but it's good news and bad news, I guess.
I mean, just assuming that they're gonna make more.
Yeah, the publisher has indicated that they're already arranging a second edition. I mean, for me, I mean, I'm a newbie. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a collector of books. I don't write them. So for me, this has been a huge eye-opening experience. But the publishers apparently, once the hardcover version has sold out, then they initiate the paperback version. So that's what I was expecting, but they've already come back and said, no, actually, it's sold out, so we want to do a second edition. So I'm like, so that's before the paperback. So yeah, I mean, I'll go with whatever they say. I mean, Amberley are good. I mean, they published On a Sea of Glass, which is my favorite Titanic book of all time. It's as I say, the Titanic Bible in my book. So I'll go with whatever they say.
In one of my conversations with Don Lynch, I asked him, what book out there would you recommend people pick up? And he said, well, it's got to be On the Sea of Glass.
Or did
Wow.
he say that? I mean, because obviously illustrated history is
Well,
fantastic,
I
isn't
think I framed it like, other than your books,
it?
what book are you looking at these days? And he was like, the Sea of Glass team, and I can't wait to have them on. We've had some conversations, but never, not on the show yet. Titan asked if you still have the first original model. Is that still in your collection? The one that you built that brought you to Titanic?
It's a very sad story. It could
Mhm.
almost reduce me to tears actually, because I it was in New Zealand where I built it, and I then left New Zealand. So I got married, lived in Japan, and now I'm now in the UK. And sadly, my parents, or my father in particular, sent me an image of him burning it. Because it kind of, I guess because it's made of cardboard and glue, and over the years it kind of collapsed, and he decided to incinerate it. And and I'll be honest, I get that he had to probably do that, but sending a photograph of that was the most one of the most heartbreaking things I've seen for a while. So yes, it's gone, I'm afraid. In fact, I've been looking out for that German book, the Build the Titanic. I even found one on eBay and ordered it, and it turned up, and someone had already built the model.
Hmm.
So anyway, if anyone's out there's got that book, let me know.
My wife is a thrifter. She likes to go to thrift stores and find clothes that she knows will sell, and she's got a Poshmark store. She resells it. It's her hobby. She loves doing it, and I always tell her to look out for Titanic stuff. So if she comes across it, I'm gonna send it over to you. Uh,
Brilliant.
One more question from the live chat before I ask some more questions about your book that are burning inside me, and time flies when we're having a great time. Titan asks, what was the most surprising fact you discovered during your research for the book?
Oh, that's quite easy actually. The most surprising fact is that Captain Smith isn't guilty. I mean, I say this because I had to eat my own words on this, and in fact, I've got a website that has a biography on Captain Smith, which I need to update. I've always assumed for many years, I mean, I've been studying since the late 80s, that Captain Smith was culpable, that he was one, about to retire, two, ignoring ice warnings, and three, traveling too fast. And then I always had this hunch that maybe he was slightly past his use by date, for want of a better expression.
Sure.
And when I started to do the legwork and actually sat down and started writing this book, I realized I was wrong. That, well, first of all, he wasn't going to retire. That was a myth that White Star was employing to get people to join, because a lot of the passengers would rearrange their voyages to match when Captain Smith was captain. He was a popular captain, millionaire's captain, as he was called. So I'm sure the White Star was kind of almost wanting, to make it seem like he was going to retire, even though the evidence is that there was no date set. He was on the cusp of retirement, that's for sure.
So when they say that they like threw him a retirement party the night it hit the iceberg, that's not true?
No, it's not retirement. There was a party for sure,
Okay.
but not a retirement party. No, he was. In fact, it's interesting when he signed on the crew agreement, April 10, 1912, for the departure. He actually signed on as age 59. When he was actually 62. So he was like almost thinking of when he wanted to be younger. I mean, we all do this, don't we? We always think of ourselves younger than what we are, and I can kind of sense. I mean, as evidence, Eleanor's letter post disaster, his wife, his widow, never mentions anything about retirement. I mean, if he was supposed to retire, that would be the first thing that you think she would say is, he was going to retire. How, the irony of it.
Sure.
And there's no mention within the family records at all of that. And I personally believe he probably would have stayed on until the third of the Olympic class ships. He enjoyed his job. He was known as, and another thing, a surprising thing, is that if you look at the reports from his officers that worked under him, his colleagues, even colleagues in the rival lines at the time, all say that he was a competent captain. He wasn't a risk taker. I discovered things like, for example, he slowed the Olympic down on its maiden voyage when they encountered fog and they lost about 90 minutes. So he wasn't averse to slowing down if the conditions called for it. And
Right.
so the most surprising thing for me was actually I was completely wrong about him. And I've had to go back. I mean, I don't believe he's a hero. I think that most people are neither heroes or villains. We're somewhere in that gray zone in between. But for me, I felt I got him wrong. And I had to sort of rework that in my mind. In the book, I do go through all the negative things about him. There were things he did that were not great, but he didn't ignore ice warnings and he wasn't traveling too fast. And in the book, it mentions, like, for example, there were 14 captains who post disaster came out and said, we would have done the same.
Mm.
He wasn't taking a risk. It's only in hindsight, retrospect, that we make these assumptions. And the fact that he died, he's not here to defend his side of the story. And hence it goes back to what we're talking about, that title, Titanic Legacy, that I've suddenly felt this obligation. I need to reset the story. Yeah, he's not a hero, but neither is he the villain that we've maybe painted him to be.
Fascinating. I didn't know that. I believed the hype and the story set forth that it was going to be his last voyage. All right, so time flies when you're having a great conversation, and you're gonna have to come back again. But before we wrap it up, I have to ask you, this whole like James Bond spy story, what did did somebody tell you about it? Did you just stumble upon it in your research? How did you learn that Captain Smith's daughter married a James Bond style spy?
I know. I mean, it's one of those things that just fell into my lap. I
Huh.
was there was always this question mark over her marriage to this kind of mysterious stockbroker, um, and who kind of died under mysterious circumstances. And for me, I like facts. I like evidence. I don't like to make assumptions. So I was looking for something to kind of, and to quickly kind of put context to this, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and if anyone who knows about cancer, that's one of the worst to get, and it wasn't going to go well, and I needed a distraction, and so I suddenly just dived into an archive just to look and see if I could find anything else about this mysterious husband, and suddenly, boom, there it was. It didn't say MI5. I had to find that out later, but it mentioned that he was involved in the intelligence department during World War One. And then I suddenly discovered more information about how he was involved in a failed mission to track sort of Russian sympathizers in England. And we're not talking about anyone here. We're talking about the cousin of Winston Churchill. So, there's some really interesting angles on this. And then I discovered, going back to that question about other interesting discoveries, and then I discovered that he was also in a relationship with a very famous economics professor, a Cambridge professor, by the name of John Maynard Keynes. You may have heard of Keynes economics. So he was bisexual. So I'm like, well, suddenly we've got, he's MI5, he's bisexual, he's involved in a failed mission, and I'm like, well, hang on. So now that puts in context his death. How did he die? So I then, found as much information as I possibly could about that scenario. And the book it covers whether it was murder, whether it was suicide, or whether it was accidental. And I let the reader come to their own conclusions on that. But yeah, I mean, it was a big surprise. But the interesting thing, I don't know if you know the author Inga Shiel. She's an Australian author who wrote a brilliant book on Fifth Officer Lowe. And I happened to be in Australia, and I interviewed her about what it takes to become an author. What, and she made the comment, kind of similar to what you said earlier, that it's amazing how much material is out there that's yet to be discovered, and you just have to go digging. You have to be that kind of get out your metal detector and hunt, because it's out there, and there's new information. There's a lot of regurgitated information. I mean, I dare I say this, the latest National Geographic program about the wreck, fantastic scans of the wreck, but a lot of the information was quite old. It's 20 years old information in there, right? There's a lot of information that's regurgitated. It's very rare to get new information, but it's out there. You just got to hunt for it. And I just felt very lucky. In fact, when I found the information, I didn't think I was worthy to write it. I offered it to two other Titanic authors. One turned it down, and the other said, Dan, you should write it. So I followed his advice.
It's amazing. Amazing stuff. Well, as we mentioned, you might not be able to find it online right now, but if you go to your local bookstore, you might find it on the shelf. But depending on when you're listening to it, right now we're in May of 2025. If you're finding this in the future, hello from the past. As we see the sign behind Dan there on YouTube, he's got a Back to the Future sign all lit up. But if it is a point in time where you can hop online and just grab your copy of Titanic Legacy, The Captain, the Daughter, and the Spy, I highly recommend it. How else can people follow you if they want to stay updated on all your future ventures?
Well, I mean, just going back to the book. The book is in electronic form. It's on Kindle on Amazon. So if you can't get a physical copy, and also the publisher has contacted me about doing an audio version of it. So there may be an audio version. But when it comes to contacting me, well, there's the three websites: williammurdoch.net, titanicofficers.com, and titanicswitch.com, which is about debunking all those sort of myths that are out there about not only the switch theory, but a lot of the other myths, coal bunker fires and Federal Reserve and all that kind of thing. And also I'm on Facebook and run Titanic Officers, the official group. So if you're interested in finding out all the latest information on the Titanic Officers, there's some great material on that Facebook group. I
will link to all of those websites in the show notes on the podcast and in the YouTube description. Just an aside, have you had conversations with author Steve Hall?
Oh, yes, I know Steve. Yeah, I have. Yeah.
A lot of your story, I was like, it reminds me of Steve. Like he, SOS Titanic, and then model building, and then being, from that general area. there's a lot of similarities, especially, of course, his switch theory book. But
And Australasian as well, you know.
maybe we can have you and Steve on an episode and just do a little roundtable about all of these amazing topics. I'd love to have him back. I'd love to have you back if you will join us again. This has been an amazing conversation, and I can't wait to dig into your book. And what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so. I know it's late over there. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, and if you enjoyed this episode at home, please be sure you're subscribed to your audio podcast or on YouTube. Leave a review if you can, and on your favorite platform. It helps the show continue to grow and reach new people. And I want to say thank you again one more time to our guest, Dan E. Parks. And thank you to everybody for tuning in at home, however you're listening, whenever, and just thank you for spending your time with us. Until the next episode, seize the day, follow your heart's fire, and make each day count. We'll see you later, everybody.